Alright, I can't see very well because the sun, but I took Read Aloud outside today. One, it's the last chapter of this book, and two, it's just absolutely beautiful out. And I started a fire because Mr. Hook and I have been building a lot of different things, and we had a ton of scrap wood from those projects. So I'll turn you around. We got a fire going. We got the boys hanging out. Cash is back there in a pile of leaves. Walker's right there. And those are two of the projects that I actually did by myself. They're planter boxes, and Mr. Hook is actually making much nicer ones. And he's selling them. So we have lots of different scrap wood. I have my poker stick on my lap for the fire, and Walker likes to try and steal it, so I apologize if that happens throughout this video. Thanks for those who joined our video office hours today. It was great to see your faces and tell you some funny stories and different things going on in our lives and hear what's going on in yours. And today we did a small presentation, and we'll be doing that tomorrow as well. And if you can't tune in, or you couldn't tune in yesterday or tomorrow, I did screen record that small presentation, and I will post that after tomorrow. But anyway, we are on the last chapter of Number the Stars. In this final chapter, we figured out about what was the handkerchief and why it was so important. Walker, not your yard. And then we also figured out that the Rosens and the other families made it over to Sweden, and that all worked out. And then yeah, we just learned some more information about where they stowed away the Jewish people under boats, and how they're using dogs now and things of that nature. So chapter 17 is called All This Long Time. The war would end. Uncle Henrik had said that, and it was true. The war ended almost 2 long years later. Anne-Marie was 12. Church bells rang all over Copenhagen early that May evening. The Danish flag was raised everywhere. People stood in the streets and wept as they sang the national anthem of Denmark. Anne-Marie stood on the balcony of the apartment with her parents and sister and watched. Up and down the street and across on the other side, she could see flags and banners in almost every window. She knew many of those apartments were empty. For nearly 2 years now, neighbors had tended the plants and dusted the furniture and polished the candlesticks for the Jews who had fled. Walker, where'd you go? Walker, stay over here. Sorry. For the Jews who had fled. Her mother had done so for the Rosens. It's what friends do, Mama had said. Now neighbors had entered each unoccupied waiting apartment, opening a window, and hung a symbol of freedom there. This evening, Mrs. Johansson's face was wet with tears. Christy, waving a small flag, sang, her blue eyes bright. Even Christy was growing up. No longer was she the light-hearted chatterbox of a child. Now she was taller, more serious, and very thin. She looked like the pictures of Lisa at 7 in the old album. Peter Nielsen was dead. It was a painful fact to recall on this day when there was so much joy in Denmark, but Anne-Marie forced herself to think of her red-headed almost brother, and how devastating the day was when they received news that Peter had been captured and executed by the Germans in the public square of Ryvegen in Copenhagen. He had written a letter to them from prison the night before he was shot. It simply had said that he loved them and he was not afraid, and he was proud for what he had done for his country, and for the sake of all free people. He had asked in the letter to be buried beside Lisa. But even that was not to be for Peter. The Nazis refused to return the bodies of the young men they shot in Ryvegen. They simply buried them there where they were killed and marked the graves only with numbers. Later, Anne-Marie had gone to the place with her parents, and they had laid flowers there on the bleak numbered ground. That night, Anne-Marie's parents told her the truth about Lisa's death at the beginning of the war. She too was part of the resistance, Papa had explained, part of the group that fought for our country in whatever ways they could. We didn't know, Mama added. She didn't tell us. Peter told us only after she died. Oh, Papa, Anne-Marie cried. Mama, They didn't shoot Lisa, did they? The way they did Peter in the public square with people watching? She wanted to know. Wanted to know it all, but wasn't certain that she could bear the knowledge. But Papa shook his head. She was with Peter and others in a cellar where they held secret meetings to make plans. Somehow the Nazis found out, and they raided the place that evening. They all ran in different ways, trying to escape. Some of them were shot, Mama told her sadly. Peter was shot in the arm. Do you remember that Peter's arm was bandaged and in a sling at Lisa's funeral? He wore a coat to cover it so that no one would notice, and a hat to hide his red hair. The Nazis were looking for him. Anne-Marie didn't remember. She hadn't noticed. The whole day was a blur of grief. But what about Lisa? She asked. If she wasn't shot, what happened? From the military car, they saw her running and simply ran her down. So it was true what you said, that she was hit by a car. It was true. They were all so young. Did you hear that? Walker is ripping a stick off of a huge tree that's fallen down. Oh my gosh. Alright, sorry. So it was true what you said, that she was hit by a car. It was true, Papa told her. They were all so young, Mama said, shaking her head. She blinked, closed her eyes for a moment, and took a long, deep breath. So very young, with so much hope. Now, remembering Lisa, Anne-Marie looked down the balcony, down into the street. She saw that from below, amid the music, singing, and sound of church bells, people were dancing. It brought back another memory, the memory of Lisa so long ago wearing that yellow dress, dancing with Peter on the night that they announced their engagement. She turned and went into the bedroom where the blue trunk was still in the corner, as it had all these years. Opening it, Anne-Marie saw the yellow dress that had begun to fade. It was discolored at the edges where it had lain so long in folds. Carefully, she spread the open skirt of the dress and found the place where Ellen's necklace lay hidden in the pocket. The little Star of David still gleamed gold. Papa, she said, returning to the balcony where her father was standing, watching, rejoicing the crowd. She opened her hand and showed him the necklace. Can you fix this? I have kept it a long time. It was Ellen's. Her father took it from her and examined the broken clasp. Yes, he said, I can fix it. When the Rosens come home, you can give it back to Ellen. Until then, Anne-Marie told him, I will wear it myself. And that's actually the end, but there is an afterword, so I'll read that to you now. How much of Anne-Marie's story is true? I know I will be asked that, and let me tell you here where fact ends and fiction begins. Anne-Marie Johansson is a child of my imagination, though she grew from the stories told to me by my friend Annalise Platt, to whom this book is dedicated, who she was herself a child in Copenhagen during the long years of the German occupation. I had always been fascinated and moved by Annalise's descriptions not only of the personal deprivation that her family and their neighbors suffered during those years and the sacrifices they made, but even by the greater picture she drew for me of courage and integrity of Danish people under the leadership of their king they loved so much, Christian X or Christian 10. So I created little Anne-Marie and her family, set them down in a Copenhagen apartment on a street where I have walked myself, and imagined her life there against the real events of 1943. Denmark surrendered to Germany in 1940. It is true, and it is true for the reasons that Papa explained to Anne-Marie. The country was small and undefended, with no army of any size. The people would have been destroyed had they tried to defend themselves against the huge German forces. So surely, with great sorrow, King Christian surrendered, and overnight the soldiers moved in. From then on, for 5 years, they occupied the country, visible on almost every street corner, always armed and spit-shined. They controlled the newspapers, the rail system, the government, schools, and hospitals, and the day-to-day existence of Danish people. But they never controlled King Christian. It is true that he rode alone on his horse from the palace every morning, unguarded, and greeted his people. And though it seems so charming as to be a flight of the author's fancy, the story that Papa told Anne-Marie of the soldier who asked the Danish teenager, "Who is that man?" That story is recorded in one of the documents that still remain from this time. It is true, too, that August 1943, the Danes sank their own entire navy in Copenhagen harbor. as the Germans approached to take over the ships for their own use. My friend Annalise remembers it. Hold on, I gotta move. I got smoke coming at me. Push over here for a second. My friend Annalise remembers it. And many who were children at the time had been awakened, as little Christy was, by the explosions and the fiercely lighted sky as the ships burned. On the new year of the Jewish high holidays in 1943, those who gathered to worship at the synagogue in Copenhagen, as the fictional Rosens did, were warned by the rabbi that they were to be taken and relocated by the Germans. The rabbi knew because a high German official told the Danish government, which passed the information along the leaders of the Jewish community. The name of that German was G.F. Duckwitz, and I hope that even today, so many years later, that there are flowers on his grave because he was a man of compassion and courage. And so the Jews, all but a few who didn't believe the warning, fled the first raids. They fled into the arms of the Danes, who took them in, fed them, clothed them, hid them, and helped them along to safety in Sweden. In the following weeks, the Jewish New Year, almost the entire Jewish population of Denmark, nearly 7,000 people, were smuggled across the sea to Sweden. The little hand-hemmed linen handkerchief that Anne-Marie carried to her uncle, surely something made up by an author who wanted to create a heroine out of a fictional little girl. No, the handkerchief was a part of the history. After the Nazis began to use police dogs to sniff out hidden passengers on fishing boats, Swedish scientists worked swiftly to prevent such detection. They used a powerful powder composed of dried rabbit's blood and cocaine. The blood attracted the dogs when they sniffed it, the cocaine numbed their noses and destroyed, temporarily, their sense of smell. Almost every boat captain used such a permeated handkerchief, and many lives were saved by this device. The secret operations that saved the Jews were orchestrated by the Danish resistance, which, like all resistance movements, was composed mainly of very young and very brave. Peter Nielsen, though he was fictional, represents those courageous and idealistic young people, so many of whom died at the hands of the enemy. In reading of the resistance leaders in Denmark, I came across an account of a young man named Kim Malthe-Brun, who was eventually captured and executed by the Nazis when he was only 21 years old. I read his stories as I read many others, turning the pages, skimming here and there, this sabotage, this tactic, this capture, that escape. After a while, even courage becomes routine to the reader. Then, quite unprepared, I turned the page and a face of a photograph of Kim Malthe-Brun. He wore a turtleneck sweater, and his thick light hair was windblown. His eyes looked out at me, unwavering on the page. Seeing him there, so terribly young, broke my heart. But seeing this quiet determination in his boyish eyes made me determined, too, to tell his story, and that of all the Danish people who shared his dreams. So I would like to end this with a paragraph written by that young man in a letter to his mother the night before he was put to death. And I want you all to remember that you must not dream yourselves back to the times before the war, but the dreams for all... Walker, hey! Leave the neighbor alone. Sorry. You must not dream yourselves back to the times before the war, but the dream for you all, young and old, must be to create an ideal of human decency, and not a narrow-minded and prejudiced one. That is the great gift our country hungers for, something every little peasant boy can look forward to, and with pleasure feel he is a part of something he can work and fight for. Surely that gift, the gift of a world of human decency, is the one that all countries hunger for still. I hope that this story of Denmark and its people will remind us all that such a world is possible. And that is the end. So I absolutely love this book. I love Lois Lowry. She's a great author. I challenge you today to get outside and read or write or just get outside, because it is absolutely beautiful out. You can hear the birds chirping. My fire is still going. My dogs are enjoying the outside. Get outside. Enjoy the spring that is showing its face, at least for today in Michigan. I probably will not be posting read louds for the rest of the week. I think what I might do, not tomorrow, but probably on Thursday, is to record a video talking about a couple of the books that I do have, and I might grab a couple more from school. I want to talk about some of those books, and then I'm going to post that video to Google Classroom and have you guys, along with that, take a poll of which one you think we should read next. That way you can have some interaction with what we decide to read. This was actually the next book we were going to read. Our next unit is poetry, and I know Miss Nestor and myself have some stuff that we want to do with you with that. But I also probably on Friday will be writing a journal entry as well. Not really a journal entry, but a small essay that you could write on persuasive writing. I do challenge you, though, for a free write today. I want you to talk about being brave. So they talked about it a lot in this book. They talked about bravery. And something we were looking at in this is we were looking kind of at diversity. And we've talked a little bit about diversity, but to talk about it a little bit more, I mean, there were people in this book, the Jewish people, that Germans and Nazis were prejudicial against. They wanted to extinguish the Jewish race. That was the Holocaust. So many people died, not just Jewish people, but other people, but so many Jewish people died because of the prejudice against them, because of what they believed in, because of how they looked, because of something that they had no control over. They were born Jewish. So I want you to think about if you could be brave like Anne Marie and her family was, and how you can be more accepting of other people. Before we judge and before we put our opinions on others, think about how we could take a second and we could be a little bit kinder, where we could create that ideal world of human, what did that last man say? Human decency. So we're decent to one another. How can you be more accepting of other people? So I challenge you to think about that, maybe write about that. Could you be brave like Anne Marie? Yes, no, explain why. I know this one's a little bit longer than the last couple have been, but I hope you enjoyed this book as much as I enjoyed reading it, and we'll see what we're going to read next. All right, I'll see you guys tomorrow and Thursday. Bye. Where's my M button? I can't see my mouse.